An emotionally avoidant person often feels comfortable when they are not required to fully engage in emotional closeness. They may enjoy connection but keep a safe distance, believing independence protects them from disappointment or pressure. However, when someone who once pursued them becomes quiet and emotionally self-contained, something unexpected happens. The familiar rhythm of messages, concern, and emotional availability suddenly disappears. At first, the avoidant may not react, assuming the distance is temporary. But as days pass and the silence continues, they begin to sense a shift. The person who once made them feel secure without demanding vulnerability is no longer present in the same way. This change introduces emotional uncertainty, and uncertainty is what avoidant individuals try hardest to escape. They start replaying past interactions, wondering when the energy changed and whether their own emotional distance contributed to it. Instead of relief, they feel unsettled. The realization slowly forms that the connection they thought would always remain available is no longer guaranteed. Without confrontation or drama, the emotional dynamic transforms. The avoidant must now face feelings they once postponed, recognizing that someone who truly cared has redirected their energy towards self-respect. In this quiet transformation, emotional truth becomes impossible to ignore, revealing that distance can sometimes speak louder than any confession. As the silence deepens, the avoidant person begins to recognize the hidden comfort they once received from the other's consistent effort. Emotional pursuit, which once felt overwhelming, now feels missed. They notice small absences, no one checking in, no familiar warmth, no emotional reassurance waiting for them. These realizations often arrive slowly because avoidant individuals process emotions after distance appears rather than during closeness. Memory becomes stronger than the present moment, and scenes of shared laughter or understanding resurface unexpectedly. This reflection challenges their belief that emotional independence alone brings peace. They begin to understand that connection requires mutual participation, not passive acceptance. At the same time, the person who stopped caring grows stronger, learning that self-worth does not depend on being chosen. Observing this change can awaken curiosity or regret in the avoidant, pushing them to reconsider how they approach relationships. Some may attempt reconnection while others silently carry the lesson forward. Either way, the experience leaves a mark, teaching that avoiding vulnerability does not prevent loss. It often causes it. Emotional growth begins when they realize closeness was never the threat. The real risk was letting fear prevent genuine connection from forming. Avoidant attachment often develops as a quiet survival strategy shaped by early emotional experiences. When someone grows up feeling that their emotional needs were ignored, criticized, or unpredictable, they learn to depend primarily on themselves. As adults, this pattern appears as emotional independence, yet underneath it lies a fear of being overwhelmed or controlled by closeness. They may enjoy companionship, but instinctively pull back when emotions deepen. This distance feels safe because it prevents vulnerability, which they associate with disappointment or rejection. However, this strategy works only when they believe they can leave emotional situations on their own terms. The emotional balance changes when someone who once invested energy and patience suddenly stops trying. The avoidant individual is then confronted with separation they did not choose. The silence they once created to feel safe now surrounds them without their control. At first, they might rationalize the change, convincing themselves it does not matter. But over time, the absence of familiar emotional presence unsettles them. Questions slowly appear. Was that person more important than I realized? Did my distance push them away? Emotional avoidance begins to reveal its cost. Independence that once felt protective now feels isolating. The avoidant starts to sense that emotional self-protection cannot replace genuine connection. This moment becomes a psychological crossroads, where they either deepen their defensive patterns or begin questioning whether vulnerability might actually offer emotional security rather than threaten it. As this realization unfolds, the avoidant person notices emotional reactions they cannot easily dismiss. Small reminders bring unexpected feelings, an old message, a shared memory, or a routine that now feels incomplete. These emotional echoes challenge their belief that closeness is unnecessary. They start to understand that avoidance did not eliminate emotional needs, it only postponed facing them. Meanwhile, the person who once tried so hard moves forward with renewed confidence, no longer seeking reassurance or validation. Observing this growth can be surprising for the avoidant, who may have assumed emotional availability would remain constant. Seeing someone thrive independently forces them to reconsider their own approach to relationships. Emotional growth often begins quietly through reflection rather than dramatic action. Some avoidant individuals may attempt to reconnect, while others simply carry new awareness into future connections. Either way, the lesson becomes clear. Emotional distance may offer temporary comfort, but it cannot replace the fulfillment of mutual understanding and effort. True independence does not require avoiding connection. It requires learning how to remain emotionally present without losing oneself. When this truth becomes clear, avoidance slowly transforms into curiosity about deeper emotional engagement. When someone constantly pursues connection, the avoidant person can unconsciously assume that effort will always come from the other side. Messages will arrive, conversations will restart, misunderstandings will be forgiven, and emotional closeness will remain available without requiring much initiative in return. This pattern becomes comfortable because it allows the avoidant to maintain distance while still benefiting from emotional attention. However, the dynamic shifts dramatically when the person who once tried begins to step back. Suddenly, there are no repeated attempts to reconnect, no emotional reassurance, and no pressure to respond. At first, the avoidant may interpret this silence as temporary or even welcome it as relief. But as time passes, a subtle discomfort appears. The familiar emotional safety net is gone, and they realize the connection depended more on the other person's effort than they admitted. Questions begin to surface. Why did they stop trying? Did I appear uninterested? Was my distance misunderstood? This quiet reflection becomes the beginning of emotional awareness. Instead of feeling in control, the avoidant feels uncertain, noticing how much they relied on someone who was always present. Emotional distance now feels less like freedom and more like loss. The absence exposes a truth they rarely confront. That connection cannot survive on one person's effort alone, and emotional security disappears when participation is not mutual. As realization deepens, memories begin to feel different. Moments that once seemed ordinary suddenly carry emotional weight. The avoidant recalls conversations they avoided, invitations they declined, or feelings they dismissed too quickly. Emotional understanding often arrives late for those who fear closeness, appearing only after distance becomes real. At the same time, the person who stopped chasing grows emotionally stronger, focusing on personal well-being rather than seeking validation. Observing this change can create unexpected curiosity or regret within the avoidant, who now sees independence where dependency once existed. This shift challenges their belief that emotional closeness always leads to pressure or loss of freedom. Instead, they begin to see that healthy connection allows both people to remain whole while sharing emotional space. Some avoidant individuals may attempt to reconnect when they recognize what they lost, while others simply learn from the experience. Either way, the lesson remains powerful. Emotional availability cannot be assumed. It must be appreciated and reciprocated. Growth begins when they understand that avoiding vulnerability does not protect relationships. It quietly erodes them, leaving behind lessons that often arrive only after someone has already moved on. A powerful shift begins when the person who once chased emotional closeness turns their focus inward and starts rebuilding their sense of self. Instead of waiting for messages, explanations, or reassurance, they invest energy into personal growth, friendships, goals, and emotional healing. This transformation is often quiet, but its effect is noticeable. The emotional urgency disappears, replaced by calm independence. For the avoidant person, this change can feel confusing. They were accustomed to being approached, pursued, and emotionally accommodated without needing to move closer themselves. Now, the dynamic has changed. The emotional pressure is gone, yet so is the comforting presence they relied on without realizing it. Curiosity begins to replace indifference. The avoidant starts noticing how the other person seems lighter, more confident, and less emotionally dependent. Ironically, this independence makes connection feel safer than before. Without expectations or emotional demands, the avoidant feels less threatened and more open. They may start wondering whether they misunderstood closeness all along. Emotional space that once felt overwhelming now feels inviting because it no longer carries pressure. This reversal exposes an important psychological truth. People are often drawn to those who respect themselves enough not to chase. Emotional balance replaces emotional pursuit, forcing the avoidant to reconsider their own role in the relationship's distance. For the first time, they must choose connection voluntarily rather than simply responding to someone else's effort. As this realization grows, the avoidant begins recognizing that healthy relationships do not require one person to carry the emotional weight alone. Memories of past interactions appear differently now, revealing moments where closeness could have grown if fear had not interfered. Observing someone thrive without waiting can spark reflection and sometimes admiration. The avoidant starts questioning whether their emotional caution protected them or quietly kept them disconnected from meaningful bonds. Meanwhile, the person who stepped back discovers an important lesson about self-worth. Genuine connection cannot be forced, only shared. This awareness allows them to approach future relationships with greater balance and emotional clarity. Some avoidant individuals may attempt to reconnect once they understand this shift, hoping the emotional door remains open. Others may simply carry the insight into future experiences, gradually learning to engage without fear of losing independence. Either way, the experience teaches both sides a lasting lesson. Emotional availability becomes attractive when it is freely chosen, not demanded. Growth emerges when people realize that connection flourishes where mutual effort and personal dignity meet, creating relationships that feel safe without requiring anyone to lose themselves in the process. Emotional absence has a unique way of revealing feelings that remained hidden during closeness. When someone who once provided steady attention and emotional presence steps away, the avoidant person often experiences an unfamiliar inner discomfort. During the relationship, emotional distance felt manageable because connection was still available in the background. The other person's patience and effort created a safety net, allowing the avoidant to remain detached without losing the relationship entirely. But once that presence disappears, the emotional quiet becomes impossible to ignore. The avoidant begins noticing the small spaces left behind, no one reaching out, no familiar conversations, no gentle persistence inviting connection. These absences slowly become emotionally louder than past interactions ever were. Memories surface without invitation, reminding them of moments they overlooked or emotionally dismissed. Because avoidant individuals often delay processing feelings, emotions tend to appear only after separation has occurred. This delayed reaction can be confusing. They may question why they suddenly miss something they once kept at a distance. The truth becomes clearer with time. Emotional absence exposes attachment that avoidance tried to conceal. The independence they valued begins to feel less like freedom and more like isolation. For the first time, they must sit with emotions they once escaped by creating distance. This experience does not always lead to immediate change, but it opens the door to emotional awareness, showing that avoiding vulnerability never truly removed their need for connection. As introspection deepens, the avoidant starts recognizing patterns in their behavior. They recall moments when they withdrew instead of communicating, or avoided emotional discussions out of fear of pressure or expectation. These reflections can bring a quiet sense of regret, not because closeness was forced, but because opportunities for understanding were missed. Meanwhile, the person who stepped away continues building emotional strength, discovering that letting go sometimes creates peace rather than loss. Observing this growth can challenge the avoidant's previous beliefs about relationships. They begin to see that emotional presence is not weakness, and vulnerability does not necessarily lead to pain. Some avoidant individuals attempt to reconnect once they understand what emotional distance cost them, while others carry this lesson forward into future relationships. Either way, the experience leaves a lasting impression. Emotional maturity often begins when individuals accept that true independence includes the ability to connect, not just the ability to walk away. The silence left behind teaches that closeness requires courage, and avoiding emotional depth may protect temporarily, but it can also quietly push away the connections that matter most. Another important realization begins when the avoidant person notices that the one who once waited for them is now moving forward with confidence and peace. There is no visible resentment, no attempt to create guilt, only a quiet continuation of life. This change can feel unexpectedly unsettling. The avoidant may have believed that emotional distance protected both people from dependency, yet seeing someone thrive independently challenges that belief. Instead of appearing broken or lost, the person who stepped away looks emotionally stronger. They invest time in personal goals, friendships, and self-growth, no longer revolving their emotional world around someone unavailable. For the avoidant, this shift introduces a new perspective. They begin to wonder whether their fear of closeness prevented them from experiencing something meaningful. Emotional independence, which once justified their distance, now seems less admirable compared to someone who can both love deeply and still stand strong alone. This observation creates an emotional contradiction. The avoidant thought avoiding vulnerability ensured safety, yet they now feel left behind emotionally. Memories of shared understanding and comfort resurface, making them question past decisions. They start recognizing that emotional availability is not a burden placed upon them, but a gift someone willingly offered. Losing access to that presence highlights its value more clearly than when it was freely given. This realization often marks the beginning of emotional reflection, revealing that protecting oneself from closeness sometimes leads to losing connection altogether. As this awareness grows, the avoidant person begins comparing their own emotional state to the calm confidence of the one who moved on. They may notice feelings of curiosity, admiration, or quiet regret forming beneath the surface. Observing someone succeed without resentment forces them to confront their own emotional defenses. They start to understand that emotional participation does not necessarily mean losing independence. Instead, it can create deeper bonds while still preserving personal freedom. Meanwhile, the person who stepped away learns that self-respect attracts healthier relationships, built on mutual interest rather than emotional pursuit. This shift becomes a lesson for both sides. Some avoidant individuals may attempt reconnection, realizing that closeness feels less threatening when both people stand emotionally secure. Others carry the lesson into future relationships, slowly learning to express feelings rather than hide behind distance. Either way, emotional growth takes root through observation and reflection rather than confrontation. The experience teaches that love does not weaken independence. It strengthens it when both people engage willingly. Emotional maturity emerges when individuals understand that true connection thrives not through control or avoidance, but through mutual presence and the courage to remain emotionally open without fear of losing oneself. When emotional pursuit finally stops, many avoidant individuals experience a form of delayed longing that surprises even them. During the relationship, they often kept emotional distance to avoid feeling overwhelmed, convincing themselves that too much closeness threatened their independence. Yet once the other person withdraws and truly moves on, memories begin returning with unexpected clarity. Familiar conversations, shared routines, and moments of quiet understanding resurface in their mind without invitation. What once felt ordinary now carries emotional meaning. Because avoidant individuals often suppress emotional processing during connection, feelings tend to surface only after distance becomes permanent. The silence that follows separation creates space for reflection, and within that silence, attachment reveals itself. They may start wondering why certain memories suddenly feel important, or why the absence of someone's presence feels heavier than expected. Emotional safety they once resisted now appears comforting in memory. This delayed emotional response becomes a turning point, forcing them to confront the reality that avoidance did not remove emotional needs, it only postponed recognizing them. Independence that once felt secure now feels incomplete, and they begin questioning whether fear of vulnerability caused them to lose something meaningful. The realization does not always lead to immediate action, but it leaves a deep psychological impression, showing that emotional walls protect temporarily while quietly preventing deeper connection from forming. As this awareness grows, some avoidant individuals feel an urge to reconnect, hoping the emotional door remains open. They may consider reaching out, remembering moments when closeness felt natural before fear interfered. Others remain silent but carry the lesson into future relationships, slowly learning to recognize their emotional reactions earlier instead of after separation occurs. Meanwhile, the person who stepped away continues developing emotional independence, discovering that letting go sometimes brings peace rather than pain. Observing this strength can further awaken reflection in the avoidant, who now sees that vulnerability is not weakness, but a pathway to genuine connection. The experience teaches that emotional distance does not guarantee safety. In many cases, it creates loneliness disguised as independence. Growth begins when they understand that risking closeness may hurt at times, but avoiding it entirely prevents the possibility of deep understanding and support. Over time, this lesson reshapes how they approach future relationships, encouraging greater openness and emotional participation. The silence left behind ultimately becomes a teacher, revealing that genuine bonds require courage to stay emotionally present rather than retreating at the first sign of vulnerability. In the end, the experience becomes a powerful lesson not only for the avoidant person, but also for the one who finally stopped chasing. When emotional pursuit ends, both individuals are forced to confront their patterns. The person who once tried endlessly begins to understand the importance of self-respect and emotional balance. They realize that love cannot be sustained by effort from one side alone. Instead of waiting for attention or reassurance, they turn their focus inward, building confidence and emotional independence. This transformation quietly changes the entire emotional landscape. Meanwhile, the avoidant person is left to reflect on the consequences of emotional distance. They begin to see that avoiding vulnerability did not protect the relationship but slowly weakened it. Connection, once taken for granted, is now absent, and the comfort they once ignored becomes meaningful in memory. The shift teaches that chasing rarely creates genuine intimacy. It often encourages emotional imbalance. When one person steps back and chooses self-worth, the relationship dynamic either transforms or ends, but in both cases, emotional truth surfaces. The avoidant must then face a choice: continue repeating patterns of distance, or begin learning how to engage emotionally with greater honesty. This moment becomes transformative because it exposes the importance of mutual emotional participation. Love cannot thrive where only one heart is working to maintain connection, and emotional maturity grows when both individuals recognize their responsibility in shaping the relationship's outcome. As reflection deepens, both sides begin carrying valuable lessons into future connections. The one who learned to stop chasing understands that emotional availability must be matched by equal effort, not demanded or forced. They approach future relationships with stronger boundaries and clearer expectations, no longer losing themselves in the hope of being chosen. At the same time, the avoidant individual realizes that independence does not mean isolation. They begin to understand that true emotional strength lies in the ability to remain open while still protecting personal identity. Some avoidant individuals eventually change their approach, learning to communicate feelings earlier rather than hiding behind distance. Others take longer to adjust, but the lesson remains planted within them. Emotional growth rarely happens through confrontation. It often emerges through quiet loss and reflection. The experience ultimately teaches both individuals that healthy connection depends on mutual respect, effort, and emotional courage. When someone stops caring, it is not merely an ending but a turning point that reveals hidden emotional truths. In this realization, both people gain clarity about what they truly need, moving forward with deeper understanding and a renewed sense of emotional responsibility in future relationships. One final realization often appears after emotional distance has fully settled. The avoidant person begins to understand the long-term pattern behind their relationships. When someone who once cared deeply stops trying, it is not just a single connection that ends, but a cycle that becomes visible. The avoidant starts recognizing similarities between past experiences. People who once moved closer, eventually stepping away. Emotional closeness repeatedly replaced by silence. What once seemed like coincidence slowly reveals a personal pattern. They begin to ask difficult questions. Do people leave because closeness is overwhelming, or because I never fully show up emotionally? This moment of awareness can be uncomfortable, yet it is deeply transformative. Emotional avoidance, which once felt like protection, now appears as a barrier preventing lasting intimacy. Memories of previous relationships surface, revealing how fear of vulnerability repeatedly interrupted emotional growth. At the same time, the person who walked away discovers something equally powerful. Caring deeply does not mean tolerating emotional unavailability forever. By stepping back, they break their own pattern of chasing emotionally distant partners. In this shared realization, both individuals begin to see that relationships reflect inner emotional habits. Silence becomes a teacher, revealing that change is necessary if future connections are to survive. Emotional growth begins when patterns are recognized, not when blame is assigned, and this awareness quietly reshapes how both individuals will approach love moving forward. As reflection continues, the avoidant person may start to feel a quiet motivation to change, even if that change unfolds slowly. They begin noticing moments when emotional openness could have strengthened past bonds, and they start considering new ways of responding in future relationships. Instead of withdrawing at the first sign of emotional closeness, they may attempt small steps toward communication and presence. Meanwhile, the person who stopped caring carries forward a renewed sense of emotional dignity, understanding that mutual effort is essential for connection to flourish. This shift creates healthier expectations for both sides. Some avoidant individuals eventually seek reconnection when they realize the value of emotional courage, while others simply learn from the loss and approach new relationships differently. Either way, the experience leaves a lasting emotional imprint. The lesson becomes clear. Relationships do not fail solely because feelings disappear, but because emotional participation